You're tapped in with the Questions Hip Hop podcast. Every week on the show, we are deep diving and celebrating hip hop music and culture, doing interviews, thought exercises, debates, and all sorts of other things with hip hop's greatest practitioners, participants, and fans. My name is Sean Kantrowitz. Now, I'm flying solo on this episode this week. Everybody who is tapped in and understands the culture and understands the importance of the architects of the sound and just direction of hip hop music knows that it is Dilla month, pretty much. Dilla's birthday just passed by. It's been 20 years since arguably one of the greatest hip hop producers of all time, uh, had an untimely passing. It's the 20th anniversary of his seminal album Donuts, which was a very influential instrumental hip hop record and certainly meaningful to myself and to many of the people who have been on the show, who have frequented the show, who exist in these sort of questions multiverse. I went to a couple of Dilla events this past week. Shout out to the Playlist Retreat. Jazzy Jeff and a whole slew of incredible musicians and DJs and producers were doing a Dilla celebration specifically for Donuts at the Regent Theater in downtown Los Angeles. And then this past weekend, I also went to Boombox in LA. This was their 19th Dilla celebration, and Knots was in the building. Shout out to Inca, C-, and all of the other incredible DJs and hip hop heads who were in the house. I can't believe it's been 20 years. It's absolutely insane to me. And so much of Dilla's music is so timeless that it, in a lot of ways, doesn't feel dated when we go to these events and we're listening to and we're celebrating all of these moments in hip hop. And look, Dilla didn't have necessarily ton of huge smash hits, but he did make music that has endured over time and has really cast a pretty substantial influence on music as we know it, not even just amongst a lot of the Soulquarian collaborators and people that were in the Dilla sphere at that time, but it's influenced scores of musicians and producers and artists since. So clearly it's going to come as no surprise that this is a J Dilla friendly show. And so what we're going to do on this episode, this is going to be a revisiting of a format that I did in 2024, and it's called Making Dill-Matic. We've done Making Illmatic. We've done Making Tip-Matic, which was a celebration of Q-Tip as a producer and artist. We've done Making Doom-Matic, where Midas and I ran through some of our favorite MF Doom joints. This is a Making Dill-Matic episode. And what I'm going to be doing in this episode is I'm going to be running through 10 of what I feel are the most underrated J Dilla productions. These are not necessarily my favorites. I'm not saying that these are the best above all others, but these are the ones that I think are the most underrated, the ones that need to be celebrated, talked about, and enjoyed. And I'm not trying to go for cool, super indie cred points here. I'm sure that there are tracks and things from beat tapes that could be argued are super underrated because they're simply not rated. But that's not what I'm doing here. You can come at me in the comments if you have notes or suggestions. This is the month to be doing this. February is J Dilla month. Big shout out to everybody who has been on the show and has shared so many Dilla stories. I want to give a shout out to everybody from Dan Charnas, author of the excellent Dilla Time book, to Frank Nitt, to Mad Skills, to Trey Hartson, Slim Kid Trey from the Far Side, Questlove. There's so many. I'm sure I'm even omitting some, but Dilla has touched so many of us with his music. And it's only right that we do this tribute and highlight some of the top 10 underrated J Dilla joints. And I want to give a quick shout out before we get into this, that if you want to support the show, I urge you to join the Questions Hip Hop Patreon. As a Patreon member, not only do you help fund this project of mine, but you also get bonus material, early access to episodes, mixes, audio, video, articles, essays written by myself, and you also get episodes in their full uncut form. I'm going to be talking a lot about music and songs in this episode, and due to restrictions on these platforms that they exist, I'm not going to be able to necessarily play all of them, but you get that sort of content and that unabridged access when you are a Patreon member. So go to patreon.com/the questions hip hop or hit the link in the description to join the Patreon. Appreciate everybody who supports. Appreciate that community that we have there. It's a good time. So yeah, I'm gonna get done with the shameless self promotion here and get into the episode. I've been listening to Dilla, almost all of my adult life, and there are a lot of reasons why I picked some of these songs. We're going to get into all of those picks. So let's get into it. Number one pick. It's going to be, we're going to go 1995 off of the Far Side's second album, Lab Cabin, California. I'm going to go with the song Drop. Now, you might say, how can a song that was a single that has a legendary, iconic music video directed by Spike Jonze, an incredible backwards motif, probably one of my favorite music videos of all time. You might be saying, how could this be underrated? And here's the thing. When people think about the Far Side, when they think about Dilla, I think there is a tendency to sing the praises of the song Running, which was also one of the other singles off of Lab Cabin, California. And to say that, it's one for the books. It's a classic song. It is. I'll say this. I think that Running is a better song than Drop is. But in terms of the actual production and the ingenuity of the techniques used to make the beat, Drop is kind of insane. And, Dan Charnas, who I mentioned a moment ago, author of the book Dilla Time, he spoke about in Dilla Time how the beat for Drop was an older beat. This was not something that was necessarily made with the Far Side in mind, but this was back from like a lot of the beat battle days that that JD at the time was involved in. And apparently JD and Proof from D12 and a Detroit ambassador of hip hop, they had sort of co-produced the song, or Proof had been around during the making of this song. But the chop, and here's what I love most about J Dilla. There are so many different techniques that a producer can use when making a beat. And a lot of times, producers and artists and musicians will sort of lean on one specific trick or one specific technique. If you pay attention to production, you know that there are like calling cards that certain producers have. But in examining the catalog of JD's production, he never really leaned too exclusively on one thing. He really had a very evenly distributed, textured, nuanced approach to making beats. And with Drop, Drop has a lot of those. It has the swing of the drums, which I guess you could say was most frequently a calling card for Dilla's production. But the way that the sample is used here, and the fact that it's like a reversed sample. Reversing samples, by the way, is such a crazy cheat code, and it can be so easily done. You just take something and you reverse it. Shout out to Missy Elliott. But just because something is played backwards does not mean that it's going to be dope. And so the way that not only was the sample chopped, and by the way, I'm not talking about actual sample sources in this episode. I'm going to, take a break from what we sometimes do in the questions, digging in the crates round. And I'm not going to, what they, call sample snitch in this episode. All the information that you'd want to know is, for the most part, pretty much out there at this point. So you can find it if you need to. But the way that this sample was chopped and then kind of used in reverse creates such a sort of surreal, slanted, off kilter vibe that was perfect for the Far Side, and it was perfect for this album. Again, I'll say I understand why Runnin' will get more accolades in the greater public forum because, again, I do think that Runnin' is technically it's a better song, and by that I mean it has a chorus. I mean, Drop kind of has a chorus, but Running really has a chorus that you could sing along to. It has more of, like some of the calling cards of traditional songwriting. The way that the verses are all just pretty much that guitar sample in Running, and then that bass comes in the hook, and it has like a chorus. It's yes, Running is a better song, but in terms of just like style and sort of demonstrating the personality and the rhyming ability of the members of the Far Side, Drop is super dope. And again, as a producer, you live for these moments where you hear something and you're like, how the fuck how the fuck did this person do this? How was this made? How was this pieced together? I don't understand. Like I know I like what I'm hearing, but I don't understand what I'm hearing. How did he do this? J Dilla is the king of the how did he do this moment in listening to hip hop beats. And Drop, hands down, is one of those moments where there's just not a lot of beats that sound like it. And that gets points for me as well. So beat number one, song number one, production number one is the Far Side's Drop. Now, track number two. Okay, listen, I know I'm going to say this, and there's going to be somebody in the comments who's like, wait a minute. This was another song that had a music video. Obviously, hundreds of thousands of dollars at least were put into the promotion of this song. But again, my number two pick is an underrated song, and I'm going to explain to you why. I'm going with A Tribe Called Quest's 1996 single off their Beats, Rhymes, and Life album. The song is called Once Again. Now, look, we've talked about it, and it's been talked about that Beats, Rhymes, and Life is obviously a demarcation in the overall canvas of Tribe's catalog, right? This was a moment that marked a departure for A Tribe Called Quest in terms of their sound, in terms of their internal dynamics, the way, the group members were getting along or not getting along, to be honest. And for many, the introduction of JD at the time to the collective that would be known as the UMA, it represented the end of and the unwelcome death of the trademark sound of A Tribe Called Quest. This was also, once again, in particular, was a song that kind of rubbed some people the wrong way because it was released in 1996. And not only did it not have like the jazzy like tendencies of songs like "Oh My God" or "Electric Relaxation," previous singles from previous albums by Tribe Called Quest, but once again also had an R&B hook on the single. Tammy Lucas is singing on once again, and so I understand why this might have rubbed people the wrong way, especially in 1996, where there really was this like line in the sand being drawn between commercial hip hop and real hip hop. But again, approaching this from a production standpoint, go in and look into what the sample was on Once Again. The way that this was chopped and flipped and manipulated into becoming the beat that it is absolutely mind blowing. It is absolutely stellar. And it's so crazy. This was so relatively early in JD's musical career in terms of on a national level. It was, I can't even imagine what it would have been like for him being a student and disciple of Q-Tip in A Tribe Called Quest, to be working with his heroes, to be tapped by Q-Tip to provide production for one of his favorite group's albums. It's absolutely, absolutely insane. And the song was nominated for a Grammy Award for Best Rap Performance by a Duo or Group at the 39th Grammy Awards in 1997. All that is to say, again, I'm not saying that Once Again is an obscure 12-inch that, nobody knows about. But I will say that because of all the baggage and the hangups that surrounded this era of everyone's favorite hip hop group, I think that Once Again is unfairly derided. The beat is insane. I think Beats, Rhymes, and Life is a great album. I never understood or knew that it was hated until I was on the internet reading message boards years ago and discovered that this was the sentiment. I always messed with it. I also have to say that I always loved how Fife's verse on Once Again was shaped around the vocal sample in the beat. There's those breaks where the sample's going, aha, yeah, y'all. And Fife was writing. He was writing to work around those things, which I think is a very underrated component of the beat and the songwriting process. He pauses his cadence, his verse, to let those vocal samples pop through. It's just one of my all-time, favorite joints. And I remember seeing the music video for the song, and it absolutely captured my imagination. And without even knowing who was involved in producing it or what the story was behind this song, I was like, yo, the murky sounds and the way that like the little elements of the sample would like bubble out, and you've got that crazy sounding bass line on there. To be honest, I go back and I recreate a lot of beats and I look into, how beats are made. I still don't really truly understand how this beat was made. I know the sample. I've listened to the sample. I'll put the sample on Patreon and do a playback on it. But it's one of those things I just don't understand. I don't understand how this was done, and that is going to, that gives me a lot of power and drive to put this on the list. That matters to me. So yeah, number two, Once Again by A Tribe Called Quest. Now, for my next pick, we're going to move into the 2000s now with my next pick, skipping ahead a little bit. And I have a few that are all from the same year, although the actual release or time that this pick was recorded is a little hazy for me. But for pick number three, I'm going to continue the Tribe Called Quest lineage here, and I'm going with Slum Village's Hold Tight remix. Now, the one I'm talking about is there's been a few different versions of this beat that have existed, right? Um, Now, being the absolute like tribe stan that I am, there was a period in time where I pretty much was buying any record that I could find that had a Q-Tip verse or a Q-Tip appearance or that I knew Q-Tip produced on. And I don't know for sure that that's what led me to buy Slum Village's Fantastic Volume 2 originally. There were a few factors. Obviously, among the circles of the internet, this was a record that was being talked about, and also just music listening circles that I was tapped into. There was a lot of high praise that was being, put onto this album. And even outside of the Q-Tip features, you know, looking at the other features on the album, it definitely would have caught my eye. Um, it Of course, Questlove was a very vocal endorser of this record. And the group also, without a doubt, played, a hand in deciding whether or not I was going to listen to this record or not. And it's what made me pick it up, honestly. All the people that were on this record really are the ones who made me pick it up. So when I picked up Fantastic Volume 2, Hold Tight might have been one of the first songs. I might have skipped right to it because I needed to. I wanted to hear the Q-Tip verse. And man, there's a great Q-Tip verse. It's sort of this State of the Union passing of the torch to Slum Village. This was around the time, or maybe right after Tribe had announced that they were breaking up after the Love Movement. And I really, really enjoyed the song. And then years later for me, I think this was floating around in various iterations that they put out uh, of Fantastic Volume 2. They put out Fantastic Volume 2.1, which was a reissue of the original record. I believe they released it in 2010. And so it was commemorating at the time, I think, the 10th anniversary of the album. And there were some differences in the track listing. There's a lot of different versions of Fantastic Volume 2 that are out there, depending on which pressing you're looking at, which record label put it out. But this was a version, 2.1, that had different versions of some of the songs, like remixes, alternate beats. And there were different skits as well. There were songs that were not on this version that were on the original. And then it also had some ones that weren't on the MCA released Fantastic Volume 2, which was the one that I and most people most likely picked up if they got it at the time. But whoa, when I listened to this new version and I heard the remix, as it was called, of Hold Tight, I was blown away. It's not in comparison to the last two beats that I mentioned, it's not necessarily on some like, whoa, how was this made? It wasn't as mysterious in terms of the production. In many ways, the Hold Tight remix is just a combination of the right sounds and the right sample sources. That's what really gives the song its character. They really give, the song its flavor, I guess you could say. And when I was hearing this song, instantly something inside of me was just like, no, this is actually too perfect. Like, I know that this is being listed as the remix, but man, this remix is way, way better than the original version. In my mind, there was no question about it. And this became, for me anyway, for my listening habits, this became the default version of the song, the remix that's on the 2.1 Fantastic. Um, and as far as I was concerned, my listening to the original version plummeted as soon as I had this one readily available. And that was further validated for me in 2022. The first episode of The Questions as a podcast, I had been doing it, live streaming it on Instagram Live for a while. um, you know, During the pandemic, I started doing live streams, but they basically were only living on the Instagram page. You'd have to go and like find the video, and it was not a very intuitive way to go back and revisit episodes. So I launched or relaunched the questions as a podcast in proper form, and I did. The very first one that I did was a live stream with Dan Charnas, author of Dilla and Frank Nitt from Frank and Dank, and it was an all J Dilla themed episode and game and conversation. And it was done to promote the release of Dilla, which had just come out or was coming out. And I believe it was prior to actually hitting record. I think me and Dan and Frank were speaking before we went live, and I said something to Frank. Shout out to Frank Nitt, a great guy and legend. And I sort of quietly suggested or put forth the theory that the Whole Tight remix on Fantastic Volume 2.1, I just had this strong feeling that it must have been the original. And Frank Nitt fucking confirmed that. He said, yes, that one did come before the one that wound up on the MCA version of Volume 2. Now, I don't remember, why it is, or I don't know if he said why it got changed and why they didn't wind up using this, but they're dope. They're both dope versions, but the pocket of the drums is incredible on this, particularly how the drums fit the verses, which is why that was the thing that sort of led me to suspect that this might have been the one that came first. Now, I'm going to throw a different loophole in here and say that we all also recently learned, if you read Dilla and some of the press, that Fantastic Volume 2, so many of the songs on that record were just recorded to a click track, no beat at all. And then Dilla created a beat around the vocals, which is absolutely fucking insane. I have to say, whether or not that was the case for this version of Hold Tight, I definitely feel like the way the pocket of the drums fits the verses, Q-Tip and, JD and T3 and Batin. I got to lean into my intuition here. I feel like that they must have written their rhymes to this beat, or at least Q-Tip must have. The pocket of the drums, that guitar loop is so hypnotizing. It sounds like something to me. I think it was like slowed down, which is a trick that JD was using frequently in songs around this era. But this song is just fantastic. No pun intended. It's I think that the fact that this track has sort of been relegated to a remix, reissue remix, I think that's why it doesn't get its just due. It's superior to me to the other one, even though I love the one on the MCA version too. But yeah, this is the definitive version of Hold Tight to me, and that's why it is making the list. Now, number 4, also in the year 2000, It is Black Star, Mos Def, and Talib Kweli, and it is their song "Little Brother" on the soundtrack to the Denzel Washington film Hurricane. Is a masterclass in chopping. If you are at all up on some of the same circles of media and information that I am, and I guess you might be familiar with it if you're watching or listening to this. But there was a big campaign going on like a decade ago or so, where Questlove was consistently singing the praises of J Dilla's production on this song in particular. For those who don't know, it is a sample. I said I wasn't going to sample Snitch, but this is a Roy Ayers sample. The song is called Got No Time. Um, this is pretty well documented, though, so I don't feel about a way about documenting this. But anyway, it's a Roy Ayers song. Pete Rock sampled it for an interlude years back on a Pete Rock CL Smooth record. And J Dilla, he would recreate Pete Rock beats as sort of an homage to his mentor and also sort of training. It's something that is one of those things that a lot of times as a producer, I can say, like, you'll hear a song and you'll be like, I think I know what happened here. I think I can kind of see how this was made, but the act of actually like reproducing and attempting to get the results yourself, it can be revelatory. It can be eye-opening. I know when I first got an MPC 2000 XL, one of the first things that I did, the song isn't on the list, but I wanted to remake the J-Lib beat for Stars. And I found the sample and I looped it up and I did an okay job. This was like pretty early on in beat making, you know, journey, especially on the MPC. So there were some things that I didn't know how to do yet at this point, but it can be very useful, just like any other instrument. When you're learning to play an instrument, it is instructive to learn how to play other people's songs. It can be useful when you make beats to play other people's beats and to replay other people's beats and to create other people's beats. Anyway, there was this interlude that Pete Rock made. J Dilla had recreated it, and I think that it got put onto a beat tape that was being circulated. That's how, Dilla was getting those beats out to a lot of his peers. And Black Star wound up recording to the actual 2-track of the beat, meaning they didn't get the stems, they didn't get the session, they didn't get any arrangement of the beat. They basically just took what was on the beat tape and recorded a song directly on top of that. And I want to say I read that Dilla was kind of upset about it at the time because I think he never intended for that to be used. It was really just an interlude. He didn't want Pete Rock to feel like, he was trying to undermine him or do anything weird. But what's really notable about the production on this song is the incredibly intricate chopping that Dilla was able to do. On the sample, on the original sample, there is talking throughout. And so what Dilla had to do was this sort of surgical micro chopping to work around the talking. It's pretty mind blowing, and it's one of those things. I think there might be. I'm sure there's definitely videos that exist out there that visually demonstrate how intricate this had to have been done to pull off. And I know again, Questlove has done a really good job at campaigning for the song and talking about why it deserves more attention than it gets. And again, this was not a single. This was, for all intents and purposes, was like a B-side or a soundtrack song that was on, it's not like Hurricane was a huge, huge film, and the soundtrack wasn't certainly wasn't, defining of this time. It wasn't this, moment in culture. But for those who know, they know that this is a really, really crazy flip or replay and a really crazy recreation. And it was pretty dope. The Roots actually performed this on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, I believe, with Black Star. Which is really dope. You should try to find that. I might post it on the Patreon if I can pull that up. So yeah, Little Brother, the song Little Brother. Maybe this was even a inspiration for the group Little Brother in picking their name. I know that they were very influenced by native tongues. So maybe this song had some sort of I don't know, some sort of influence on them picking their name, but Little Brother by Black Star is definitely in my top 10 underrated J Dilla productions. Even though, can you really say at this point any of these are underrated? I don't know. This is a thought experiment, for sure. But yeah, I mean, this is something that I think I walk around with this beat in my head consistently. Uh, it's just so cool, and even with the song getting a platform on Jimmy Fallon and getting talked about, and articles being created about it, it's really cool to be living in a time when these songs can get this sort of credit. But yeah, Little Brother, number 4. All right. Also from the year 2000, number 5, I'm going with De La Soul's Through Your City. Now, this is a song on De La Soul's AOI Mosaic Thump album. It is the only song on that album that is produced by J Dilla. I find it funny that JD played a really big part in the sound of De La Soul, but a lot of people get it wrong. Like, people will say when they talk about De La Soul's fourth album, De La Soul Stakes is High, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, that's the album where Dilla and De La Soul teamed up," but he actually only did the title track, and this is the only song on this album, the follow-up album that JD produced. And I believe he has like one song on Bionics. Peer Pressure is the only one, and then yeah, he's got a handful on the Grind Date, and a few other loosies here and there. But anyway, Three City is a really crazy beat, and I'll put in the caveat: I love De La Soul, one of my favorite groups. I don't know that this is the best De La song, just like as a song, like the hook, the chorus. I can kind of take it or leave it. It doesn't like necessarily represent the pinnacle of De La Soul's rapping ability. But man, this beat, this beat is crazy. It's a great sample. He didn't have to do a lot to it. It's honestly just a very, very dope loop that he was able to build a song around. I really enjoy. It was sort of, I would say, a predecessor to. You have to understand that there's different chapters in the career of JD, right? And everything that I had listed up to this point in the last picks was sort of more of the, I want to say, like JD slash Uma sound that was characterized by a lot of elements, many of which would go on to be the calling cards for what they would call neo soul, right? You had the Rhodes piano, the hand claps, sometimes is the only percussive element on the 2 and the 4, sometimes layered with the snare and the claps slightly off time. So it had a looser feel. You had a lot of like third sounds. And so this song, the Three City beat, was sort of more leaning into what would become the new iteration, especially one that would take more of a center stage when JD rebranded himself as J Dilla. And it's not because I'd say this has more of a synthetic sound, but again, that's actually because of the sample. I don't think, from what I can remember or understand, that there's a lot of like replaying or actual synthesizers that JD used in this beat. But it does sort of represent what was going to be the next iteration to me. And that was something that I really always loved. And I think one of the greatest things about JD is that he was not afraid to reinvent his sound and start new chapters that weren't, it's not like he was doing a complete betrayal or disavowing of what he had done before, but he didn't seem like somebody who was content to retread older material or older sounds or older sonic pathways. And this is just, for lack of a better word, it's a slapper. Slaps. Yeah, again, the song might not necessarily be in my top 10 or my top 20 or my top 30 De La Soul songs, but the beat is really dope. It remains one of my favorites, and I don't think that this one gets brought up much, not in the sort of catalog of JD beats, and certainly not in the De La Soul and JD, collection collaborations. So De La Soul's Through Your City got to be on there. This is my list. These are my underrated joints. That's what I got. So moving on to Number 6. On 2004's Slum Village album, Detroit Deli, the song is called Do You. There's a lot of, I'm not going to say there's rules, but there are certain tenets of beat making in hip hop. And we talked about one of them earlier, how, Dilla was recreating the Pete Rock beat or the interlude. And that's how that became that song, Little Brother. I think when it comes to people sampling, there's also there's a phase in every producer's like journey that they go through or they did. I don't know if this is the case anymore. I don't know what sort of standard or overarching kind of like collection of guidelines that guide newer producers, younger producers, but there's like a holy grail. There's songs that you feel or producers feel that it can't be touched because they've already been perfected. And I think some of the greats and something that has been done over the years has been the revisiting of the holy grail moments. The things that are so closely associated with other songs, like past instances of hip hop producers sampling, that they seem untouchable. And then it kind of becomes a flex of what can you do with it? Are you going to be able to flip the source material? You're going to be able to flip the sample in such a way that you can maybe almost like, I don't know, you can make people forget that it was a sample in the past. And that is what JD was doing here on this song. By this point, uh, Dilla was no longer in Slum Village, but his presence on the albums was still definitely felt because he was contributing. He was on good terms with the group. He was doing a few joints every album while he was still alive, and I mean, after he passed, even as well, he's represented there. But Zapp's "More Bounce to the Ounce" was such a such a huge part of so many hip hop songs. From EPMD, you got to chill. MC Breed, no Future in Your Front, and even Notorious B.I.G.'s Going Back to Cali. There were a lot. It's like well traveled territory. So for him to be able to flip that in a way that is definitely evident, like nobody is going to hear this and be like, oh well, I wonder what he sampled here. It's very obvious. So it's a nod, it's an homage, but it's also kind of a stunt. It's like I'm going to take it, I'm going to do something different with it. It's definitely flipped in a different way. And again, this is happening around the same time in 2004. By this point, he is definitely shed his Soulquarian, his Uma skin. Right, he's starting to move more into what would eventually become a more realized electro sound. And this is one of those that kind of bridge that gap, I think. And shout out to Slum Village. I had young RJ and T3 on the show. I think it was at the time of the release of their last album. It's so dope to see them continuing to hold the torch for Slum Village, wave the flag. And it's like obviously a very different group now than the Fantastic iteration. But it's really cool to have seen T3's perseverance and the most recent Slum Village album, Fun FUN, is great. It's continuing the sound and the feel that they created, but it's definitely putting it into a new era, a new sort of iteration. So, and we were seeing that even on this song, because Slum Village is a group that has gone through many, 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 many personnel changes, and but it's still Detroit. It still has that feel. So this was this was a very dope iteration of what they could do in this stage of their career. So all right, we're gonna move on to number 7. Yeah, pick number 7. 2007. It's Nasty by Nasty Ain't It by Fat Cat. So I alluded to the fact that there was this like new iteration or new chapter that Dilla was moving towards. And for me, this is definitely part of that more electro sound. It's such an aggressive beat. I love the way that it just comes in. I love beats that just start, that kick in the door and punch you in the face. A lot of times there's a tendency in arrangements for producers to let it build. And I think that there is some real value in having a beat that just smacks you in the face. This is not a hot take here. This was a beat that I had heard on beat tapes that were circulating around this time. I also remember there was an early, like a early version of J Love Japan. I don't know the full story, or I don't remember the full story about the different versions of that release, but there was a version of this beat that had Jack Davy from J Davy on it. When it comes to Fat Cat Productions, they probably are quicker, they're going to be quicker to cite Don't Nobody Care About Us, which is a great, great beat. But for me, I really, really enjoyed this iteration of what Dilla was doing. And again, you see sort of the common elements from Through Your City to this, that sort of chunky bass like synth, that electro sound. It's just great. And it's not the last, and it's not the only iteration of the different style chapters that Dilla would do, but it's really good, and it's got Dilla on the hook as well. That's this is definitely an underground classic. It's underrated for me, and it just beats like this basically showcase why Dilla was not a one-trick pony, because this does not really sound like, some of the earlier songs that I listed in this list at all, really. In fact, they very well, they have completely different sonic identities, and you wouldn't be mistaken if you didn't know, if you were just listening to this blind and if you attributed like the early 90s stuff and this stuff to different people, different human beings, you couldn't be blamed for that. But this one is definitely, definitely underrated and hard hitting, and I like it. That's the only criteria. I don't have a lot to say about this one. So we're gonna move on to number 8 from the year 2008. This was also a single. It's off Q-Tip's The Renaissance album, and the song is called Move. So I remember hearing the beat for this before it was a Q-Tip song. This was another one that was circulating on beat tapes. And I want to say again that unofficial sponsor of this episode, Questlove, I want to say that he maybe posted this on his MySpace. Shout out to the days of MySpace. What an era. If you know, you know. If you missed it, I'm sorry. But he posted this beat to his MySpace on the music player. And it was definitely like another moment of like, whoa, Dilla is doing something really crazy here. I would say that this beat falls into another of the like latter day categorizations of J Dilla production. And this is more of what, like, I guess could be called like the Motown sound, or definitely I guess more so going with simplicity. I think that Dilla was definitely influenced and was influential too, but he was also influenced, and there was sort of a collaborative inspiration thing going on with Madlib at this time. He had moved out to LA, and Dilla was kind of doing a lot of Madlib type things in terms of the way that he would produce. And there was a real chemistry and camaraderie that was happening between the two of them. And definitely one of the examples of this is just the chops. It's really just basically chops and taking material and sort of doing it in a sort of knowingly winking way. If a song like, like Do You that we talked about was basically using a Zap sample and freaking it in a different way, this is taking the material and not doing like, for a song like Once Again that we mentioned earlier, or Far Side's Drop. This is taking, sample material and masking it so thoroughly on those songs that it would be very difficult to identify. And even when you know what the sample material is, if you go and listen to that Far Side song or that Tribe song, it's still difficult to kind of understand what the hell is going on. Whereas a song like what would become the beat for Q-Tip's Move, it very evidently samples the Jackson 5's Dancing Machine. but it becomes more so not just like flipping it and doing it in a way that provides a new twist on what should ultimately feel like very familiar. But there's also a little bit of like humor, you could say, or I guess ingenuity as well, but doing it in a comical way of taking the Michael Jackson vocal and basically, you know, let's just say what it is. He's basically making it sound like Michael Jackson is throwing up or vomiting almost. The way that the chops and the stretches are being done is it's funny to hear, but it's also extremely dope. This is not like a novelty record by any means. And then to have Q-Tip make what is such a really dope song over it was really cool. And on the record, there's the single version of the song "Move," and it has a Jackson 5 theme music video motif as well. But on the record, um, this song is one of those where it's like split into two. There's Move, the section we just talked about, but then there's also the song Renaissance Rap, which is in and of itself an homage that Q-Tip was doing to JD. We're not talking about that. I'm just talking about how it generally was put together on the record. But Move is really great, and as like what feels like one of the last moments. I want to say that this might have been recorded after JD had passed. So I don't know if it's necessarily like the last collaboration with Q-Tip and Dilla, but Dilla became such an instrumental, no pun intended, part of Q-Tip and a Tribe Called Quest sound that, you know, if Tip puts out another record, I feel like it's going to need it won't feel right if it doesn't have Dilla production on it. He was such a pivotal part to his story and vice versa that we wouldn't know Dilla if it wasn't for Q-Tip. So it just felt good to have them, come together on this song so closely on the heels of Dilla's passing. It's an amazing song. It's a really amazing beat just on a technical level for him to even think to do it, let alone to pull it off. Move by Q-Tip definitely belongs on the list of my top 10 underrated J Dilla productions. So we got two more left. 2009. It's Most Def from his Ecstatic album, and the song is called History from the Ecstatic album. Um, this is again coming from a similar kind of Motown choppy era. And now, when I say Motown, I'm not necessarily saying that all these songs were Motown records. I think part of this might just be I think there was a beat tape that was called like Motown tape or something. It might have been erroneously titled Motown, and I don't know if that title even came from Dilla himself or if somebody else named it that. But really, when I say that, he was just taking soul records and doing these sort of chop, style replays, not replays, but just reimaginations of them, and just it's like the meat and potatoes, bare bones. Like all I need is this record, and I'm gonna chop it up and put some drums on it, and it's gonna be super dope. And it was. This one has a really cool sort of chop in terms of the word. The song's called History, and the word history, the way that it's chopped on the record in different ways. And then Black Star did a song basically based around that word. Obviously, the beat is playing throughout, so it would make sense they would try to incorporate that. And this song came, Black Star had been pretty inactive for like a decade prior to this song, and there was a lot of conventional wisdom and thinking like, are Most Def and Talib Kweli ever gonna make another record again? And they did. They did years after this came out. Um, uh, which I forget the name of the record, but yeah, they did come together. But to have the two of them rhyming on a song together when History came out was a big deal. I remember when I got Quality's Quality album, and that was like around 2002. And when that first came out, I saw on the track list that there was a song that featured the both of them. And I remember I was a little disappointed because it actually turned out to just be a Quality song with Most Def doing the hook. Um, uh, and so, yeah, the Black Star project had a lot of promise, and they made what a lot of people feel is a classic debut record, and then not a lot of collaborations since then. But this song, History, is a great song. It's a dope flip. Both of the MCs on the track really get to reminisce, and get a little wistful about the passage of time. I think even more so accentuated by the fact that Dilla had passed, and they were rhyming over, a song, a track by their friend who is no longer there. But it's a really special moment, and I mentioned something similar for the Little Brother song, but they also performed this song on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, and they performed this with members of the band Dirty Projectors, where the female vocalists were actually singing the sample flip live, which was really crazy because it's kind of intricate and it isn't just one repeated thing, and they were like nailing the articulations perfectly. I'm gonna have to find that. I might put this on the Patreon too. I think I have the recording of that, but it was a really, really cool moment. And I'll also take this moment to say The Ecstatic is such a great Mos Def album. I think there are certain days where I might actually say it is my favorite Mos Def album. I actually prefer it even to Black on Both Sides, which I know is a crazy statement, but sometimes I feel that way. I feel pretty strong about it. I'll have to go into that on another episode, but that's why History is on this list. It's super dope and definitely underrated. And so now it brings us to pick number 10. It was released in 2016. It was on Phife Dawg's final album, released early as a single, and the song is called Nutshell. So this song was also released again in 2022 as Nutshell Part 2. It was like the remix, same beat, and also featured Busta Rhymes and Redman. And so Fife was definitely waving the flag pretty hard and heavy for Dilla. Obviously, while Q-Tip might have had more material under his belt with Dilla, it definitely would be a mistake to discount the fact that all of the members of this tribe, no pun intended, were really close, and they were there for each other at such pivotal times in life. Fife had released a tribute song to Dilla in, I think, like 2014. It was called Dear Dilla. And so, there was definitely a lot of love there. And Dilla had done some joints on Fife's first solo album. And so for Fife to use one of Dilla's beats, this definitely sounds like an earlier beat. I can't tell you a lot about it. I just don't have the information. But this sounds to my ears like this is earlier era JD. And by this point, I think a lot of Dilla's catalog and unfinished or unreleased production was being mined and supplied to people through various forms. And this was a trusted source. This wasn't like one of those things where, to my knowledge, somebody just unsanctioned, used a Dilla beat in an unsanctioned way. Obviously, Nutshell is really good, and that they went through the proper channels to put it out. And I think this one is underrated just because there wasn't a lot of promo behind it, because obviously by the time it was released really out there, the remix of Nutshell, you know Fife was also no longer with us, which is a real tragedy. But to me, the reason that I'm including this is not just because I think it's a bit unheralded and that it's dope, but I also think that Nutshell belongs on here because it just sort of signifies the fact that I really do think that Dilla's music is timeless, and that so many of these beats, they're so funny. There's sirens going by, and Dilla put sirens on his beats. This song, well, anyway, Nutshell came out in the late teens, I guess like 2016, and then it was released again in 2022. And I wouldn't be surprised if this beat was from the early to mid 90s, and it still packed so much of a punch. It was so potent, and I just really like that one of these, the way that I'm ending this is still keeping things in the tribe. No pun intended. How many tribe puns have I made in this episode? You'll have to count and let me know. But there's so much overlapping in a lot of the songs that I have here, where you have different Slum Village, contributions, different iterations of Tribe and its members. We've got different members of Black Star and Black Star songs and collaborations. Dilla didn't have like a huge net in terms of who he contributed songs to and who he collaborated with. The reason why people love his material so much is because of the library that he built with a lot of the same people. He wasn't, if you look at like a Timbaland or a Swizz Beats or somebody who had a really wide range of people and was the go-to hired gun who would, oh, you get these guys to do your single. A lot of these songs, while there were singles, a lot of the songs were album cuts, or not even album cuts, soundtrack cuts, or just random one-offs. It wasn't just about creating singles and shifting units. It was about creating a body of work and songs and an aesthetic that would define a sound and that would define the character of an artist's music that couldn't necessarily, that's not always what you want or get from singles. Artists have big singles and they might be timestamps and markers in time, but that doesn't necessarily signify what the artist's actual identity was. And Dilla wasn't only just good at creating his own sonic identity, but also helping the other artists that he worked with develop their own sound. That's where, that's where I'm at with it. And yeah, I think we're gonna call it a wrap there. Shout out to J Dilla, shout out to everyone who continues to wave the flag, all of the amazing people who called Dilla fam, friend, a collaborator. Shout out to House Shoes, he's another guy who's been on the show a few times. Shout out to Ma Dukes, shout out to everybody who is helping to keep the legacy and the sound and the importance alive. Shout out to the Questions Hip Hop Patreon. Like I said, I'm going to put more uncut versions of this episode there. And yeah, let me know what your favorite Dilla tracks are. Comment in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. Let me know what your favorite underrated tracks are. Yeah, we'll be back with another episode of the Questions Hip Hop Podcast. Rest in peace, J Dilla.